Hi, welcome to our second video on Sonkeigo. In this video, we're going to briefly review what Sonkeigo is and when it's used, and then we're going to cover some more vocabulary terms that are used in Sonkeigo quite often and that you'll probably run into while in Japan. Specifically in this video, we're going to look at some Sonkeigo verbs with irregular conjugation patterns that, while they need to be memorized to a certain extent, shouldn't be too much of a trouble for you. So to begin, let's remember, we're only going to use Sonkeigo when describing the actions of a second or third person that we want to show respect to. Because remember, Keigo is respectful language, or it's humble language. And so Sonkeigo is going to be a subset of that, only used for second and third people. You're never going to use these terms to describe what you're doing. That is very important to remember. All right. So the first word we're going to cover in this video is one that you've probably already heard before and didn't even know it. It's nasaru, and it's generally going to have the meaning of suru from normal everyday language. So let's look first off at its usage in a very common expression. Oyasumi nasai. Now, chances are you know what this means. It's the equivalent of our English good night. But let's try to break it down grammatically and see what it actually is and how it's structured. So first off, we have the word oyasumi. So now, o just being a respectful prefix. We know yasumi means a rest. It's a noun meaning a rest, right? And so then nasai means suru, right? So it's rest and then do. So maybe something like do a rest. And that's exactly right. Nasai is going to be the meireke, or the imperative form of nasaru. But that should look a little weird to you. Why isn't it nasare or something like that? It's nasai, and that's because when we conjugate nasaru and the rest of the verbs in this video, and we want to add mas, for example, we're going to take off that ru, and we're going to replace it with an i, and then add mas. So nasaru will not be nasarimas, it's going to be nasaimas, right? And so now here we can see that, okay, it's just nasai, so that's just a kind of antiquated imperative form of this verb. And now you do hear this verb in other context being used as nasai in that imperative form. And you would think, based off expressions like this, that it must be really polite. And indeed, it used to be very polite. But these days, it's not very polite at all. And you generally hear it used towards children, for example. You might hear a mother say to her children, tabe nasai, or ne nasai, eat, go to bed, something like that. That's usually how it's used these days. So I wouldn't recommend using it yourself. But obviously, it's good to know when you do hear it used. Now, where it is respectful to use it is when you are doing what you do with Sonkeigo and describing the actions of a second or third person. So let's look at an example of that. Kachou wa 2時から食事をなさいます. Okay, so if we're having trouble with nasaimasu, replace it with shimasu. And then it means the section chief is going to eat at 2 o'clock. Or literally, shokuji o nasaru, do eating. He's going to do eating at 2 o'clock. And that's because shokuji, being a noun, is going to take suru, or in this case, nasaru, because it equals suru, to make it into a verb. All right. So our next verb we're going to look at is irasharu. And this is another one used in a very common expression that you've definitely heard before, but maybe not used yourself unless you've worked in Japan. Irashaimase. Right. And so again, you're going to see shai, not shari. We'll get to that in a minute. But first, the meaning is, again, kind of a wide one. But again, it's not going to have too many problems for you in trying to comprehend the sentences it's used in. So it's going to correspond to the standard everyday iru, iku, or kuru. So all these kind of being and movement verbs, right? So you should kind of have that general category in your head whenever you see this verb. So irashaimase it's used, and you can see again it's not irasharimase, because mase is again an antiquated imperative form, but it's I. So when you want to add mas, because this is an old imperative form of mase is, you're going to have to take off that ru and then add an I before you can add that mas. So it's going to be irashaimasu, irashaimashita, irashaimasen, not irasharimasu. That's bad. Irashaimasu. So now let's look at its use in a sentence. First off, we have Senshu sensei ga watashi no ie ni irashaimashita. If you saw the last video, this sentence will look familiar. And we're going to have the exact same sort of dynamic we saw with oide ni naru in the last video, where you could have this as last week the sensei was at my house, or he went to my house, or he came to my house. And no matter which one it is, you're going to know he was at the house, right? So again, because it's your house, you're living there, or it's the speaker's house, I should say, kuru is probably going to be the best translation. The teacher came to my house last week. But again, it's not too important because you're going to know that he was there in any case. And again, context generally would fill in some of those gaps that we don't necessarily have just looking at example sentences. So next. For this sense, let's imagine we're walking up to somebody's house and we knock on the door and somebody that we don't necessarily recognize comes and answers. We could say, "Sumimasen, Natsume-san wa irashaimasu ka?" Now, in this context, iku and kuru aren't going to make sense because we're asking if Natsume-san is in the house. Excuse me, is Natsume-san in? Would maybe be the best translation of the sentence in English. So in contexts like these, where you have more context, irasharu cannot really mean iku or kuru. Excuse me, is Natsume-san going? Is Natsume-san coming? No, is he there? Right, because we're at his house. We don't know if he's there, not if he's, So in certain contexts, you can generally pick one of these and it's going to be the best fit. In other contexts, you can't. But the important thing to remember is just the general meaning of these verbs and then being able to kind of have a elastic sort of way of comprehending these, that any of these meanings could work equally as well, and just getting the essential information. That's the most important part. So the next verb we're going to look at is osharu. And this is related to a bunch of verbs that have something to do with speaking, like yu, hanasu, or tsugeru, right? So let's look at the first example sentence. Tenchou wa shachou no houkoku ni tsuite oshshaimashita. All right, so for this one, if we have a ni tsuite, that's probably going to mean hanasu should be coming after that in the everyday. So if osharu is coming here, we could probably interpret this as meaning hanasu, and that's going to make perfect sense for this sentence. This sentence is going to mean the branch manager talked about the company president's report, right? Tenchou wa shachou no houkoku ni tsuite oshshaimashita. All right. For our second sentence, Kachou wa Tanaka-san ni ristora no yotei o oshshaimashita. Okay. So yotei o, again, if it's o, probably hanashimashita. O hanashimashita, so o oshshaimashita. This is going to mean the section chief talked to Tanaka-san about the company restoration plans. All right, so this is a pretty simple one, and I think you're getting the hang of it by now, that even though some of these can be used like a number of different verbs from the everyday language, that it's not really so important to figure out exactly which one it means, but that also context, such as nitsuite or o coming before the verb, can help you decide which one of those verbs is going to be the best translation. All right, another verb, kudasaru. This is another one you absolutely use almost probably every time you speak Japanese, because this is where we have kudasai from, right? And kudasai, again, kudasaru, kudasaimasu, kudasai, it's the old imperative that has just become fossilized in use and is still polite even today. And so this is going to correspond to the everyday kureru, so it's going to have that meaning of either somebody giving you something or somebody doing something for you. And we're going to look at one example sentence for each of those two meanings. So the first one, Sensei wa ii seiseki o kudasaimashita. Pretty simple sentence, and this is going to be the basic give meaning, right? So just the basic kureru, because we don't have anything in front of kureru. Remember, if we're doing something for somebody, that's the shite kureru construction. This is just normal kureru, so this is just going to mean give. So the teacher gave me a good grade. Ii seiseki o kudasaimashita. Gave me a good grade. Let's look at the other meaning now. Kachou wa shinshou no koto o oshatte kudasaru tame ni watashi no jitaku made irashaimashita. Now that's a long one, and we're actually seeing several Sonkeigo words that we've looked at already in this sentence, but we're going to focus on is oshatte kudasaru, right? So if we remember, osharu means maybe to talk about. Oshatte kudasaru means talked to me about, almost like hanashite kureru, right? And so if we think about that, then this is going to mean the section chief came to my house to tell me about my promotion. Shinshou no koto o oshatte kudasaru tame ni, in order to tell me about promotion, right? So not too difficult, but you do have to kind of, get comfortable with these verbs as opposed to the ones you're already comfortable with. But because you can often give a one-to-one correspondence with some of these, it's a little easier to do. So in this video, we reviewed what Sonkeigo is and when it's used. We looked at 4 Sonkeigo verbs with irregular conjugations. So, for example, nasaru does not become nasarimasu, it becomes nasaimasu, and all of these do the same thing. So, osharu, oshaimasu, so on and so forth. And then we also looked at the way that those words are used in sentences, and a few tips as to how to, for some of these verbs that have more than one meaning, how we can maybe get either the exact meaning or how the exact meaning isn't really important. So I hope to see you next time when we're going to look at some kenjogo, another type of keigo. And that being said, 今回もよろしくお願いいたします。